And joining us now is former New York City Mayor Bill de Blasio. Mayor, good to have you here. Lots of moving parts, obviously, on this issue of immigration. When you look at the buildup, the ramp up to these mass deportations, how should Democratic, local, state, federal leaders meet this moment?
Anna, I think we got to remember the Constitution is still fully in effect, and that means that states and localities have a lot of power in this equation. I think there's been so much angst over the Trump administration coming in certain quarters, obviously among Democrats. There's almost been a little amnesia about what we saw in the previous 4 years. I spent 4 years as mayor of New York City, often having to challenge Donald Trump. We went to court many times. We actually won on a regular basis. We had the independent power as a locality to govern our own affairs. And this is a profoundly American reality. The founders created a country where a lot of the power devolved down to states and localities. They did not want a national government that controlled everything. So, for example, if you have a city like New York that says, we're not going to ask documentation status in our schools, hospitals, or with our police force talking to people out in the streets, they're not going to ask documentation status because that's how we actually keep people safe. Talk to NYPD leaders and they'll tell you, once you start asking people documentation status, no one's going to talk to you if they happen to have an undocumented status. And that means you can't protect the community.
And that's the reason for sanctuary city policies. For example, when you were mayor during the first Trump administration, you mentioned opposing some of these controversial moves like the Muslim travel ban,
Correct.
for example. But what do you tell, or what should Democrats do who are now facing threat of arrest or even prosecution for impeding enforcement of these new immigration policies?
Look, I think we have to have faith that our system continues to function. I saw the bluster of some of those executive orders the other day, some of which are clearly unconstitutional. I'm not belittling the fact that the president will get some of the things done he wants, but in the end, the court system will decide a lot of this. If the track record of the last 4 years when he was president is any indication, he's going to lose a fair amount of the time. He's clearly going to lose on birthright citizenship, in my view. So states and localities saying, hey, guess what? We are given the power by the Constitution to govern our own folks. And we're making decisions about public safety. This is something I think needs to be talked about more. Not asking documentation status is actually how you protect public safety. Now, look, if someone commits a crime, God forbid, an undocumented person commits a crime, there's due process, they're guilty, they should be out of here. That's what New York City law says. I think Americans believe in due process. That's another point here. I think Trump often likes to leave out that step and say, if you're accused, therefore you're guilty. Well, that goes against American values for 250 years. We've always believed in due process. I think we have to go back to the fact that he was vulnerable many times in his first term. He's going to be vulnerable again in the court system and in the court of public opinion.
Well, speaking of the court of public opinion, he ran on these hardline immigration policies. Yeah. He won, and there is recent polling that shows the majority of Americans agree with some of the broader overall approach to this, like the deportation issue specifically. Now, on some of the certain aspects of immigration, maybe unpopular, like ICE being able to carry out deportations at churches or schools or hospitals, there is disapproval on that one. You'll recall during the first Trump term, there was public backlash for some of the more extreme immigration policies, family separations. But what if that public backlash doesn't materialize this time? Then what do Democrats do?
I think it did materialize for organic reasons. So I hear your question, but I want to note that, for example, the unaccompanied minors, and I went to Tornillo, Texas, and saw one of those detention facilities for those kids. Americans were outraged. It doesn't fit our values to see families separated under any circumstance. Americans believe in due process. Americans do not like the notion of the knock at the door and government authorities taking people away. So I think what's happened is the frustration that people felt about their economic reality, or the frustration they felt about the disorder at the border, which was real, that was honest frustration, that's going to be quickly replaced, I believe, by people saying, wait a minute, we never signed up for actual mass deportation and something that looks like a police state. That's just not American. Americans have a very strong libertarian streak, left, right, center. So I think what's happening is in the first days, it sounds great. We're going to get rid of folks who committed crimes. Who wouldn't want to get rid of someone who actually committed a crime, of course? But it's going to devolve into something much more tangled and that will push a lot of buttons and make people feel more and more uncomfortable. Last time, Trump did not hear that at all. When people started to object, including folks who even agreed with him in some ways, but they thought it was inhumane, they thought it was anti-family values, when faith leaders started to object, he had a tin ear for all of that. It's only going to be worse this time.
It seems there is somewhat a rift within the Democratic Party that is starting to materialize on the issue of immigration. Just, for example, what we're seeing here in New York City with the current mayor, Mayor Adams, who is saying he's ready to work with Trump on enforcing these immigration policies. He's now opposing New York's sanctuary city laws. This is a 180 from when you were in office.
Sure.
What do you make of it?
Look, I don't happen to agree with what he's saying, but I also think people in this city are not going to accept mass deportation. So it's one thing to say, oh, we'll work with a new president because he was elected duly.
Do you think it's personal, though, for Mayor Adams because of his situation?
Yeah.
Facing, criminal prosecution? He's trying to get on the good side of the president?
I think the simplest answer I can offer you is yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mayor Bill de Blasio.
The truth can be simple sometimes.
It's so rare we get a yes-no answer to a yes-no question. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you, Anna.
Good to have you here. Well, despite new allegations that have arisen against people